Welcome to XP42, and today we're talking to Trent Fulcher, who is, I'm very excited about his company, is the CEO of Airshare. And we're going to find out a lot about what Airshare does. But before, Trent, how did you get here? You're clearly not from New Zealand. How did you get to New Zealand?
Well, Clinton, thank you for having me on the show today. It's an honor, and it's been really good to get to know you. So yeah, originally I'm from Idaho, up in the Rockies, and a long story, but basically fell in love, came to New Zealand, stayed, and we bounced back and forth between the States and the UK.
So you came for a girl.
Basically, well, I got my heart stomped on by another girl in the U.S. and wanted to get as far away as I could from Idaho, and New Zealand was the place. So ended up falling in love and staying here.
Right.
So.
And you've done a few roles at in New Zealand in general, and you went from strategy right up to being a CEO. And like, what did that journey look like?
What's that journey?
Yeah.
Yes, I was in. We were in Seattle before we came to New Zealand, and I had a tech recruiting company.
Oh, right.
I started with a couple of friends, and we serviced Microsoft and Boeing and a few other clients. And then the dot-com boom hit, or the crash hit, I should say.
Right.
And it was time to go, and so I sold out of that business and came to New Zealand. And really felt at the time I needed to kind of go back to school and hone my strategy craft, because I was doing strategy work, but I probably didn't have the methodology and the process I needed to be effective. So I actually joined up with PricewaterhouseCoopers in their strategy team, and just really cut my teeth on some good methodology and process, and did a lot of fun work there. Then it was time to do another overseas trip, and we went to the UK, which we thought was going to be for 2 years, but that ended up being 9 years. And I did strategy consulting, and then eventually, when the financial crisis hit, decided to do an MBA, and then did the MBA in finance, and then got into banking after that, and really was able to kind of combine strategy with banking, an industry that was going through a lot of disruption.
Right.
Fast forward, started having kids, and then came back to New Zealand with Kiwi Bank doing strategy, and then eventually into transport and air traffic control doing strategy.
So how do you do strategy for air traffic control? I mean, it's pretty much a lockdown environment. Change is not welcoming.
Yeah.
So how do you resolve some of that? How do you change in an environment that's so heavily regulated?
Yeah, great question. And I think the way that strategy is done has changed a lot in the last few years. So when I did my MBA 8 or 9 years ago, the skills that you learned out of that have completely changed now in terms of how you basically help businesses survive through disruption that they're all going through, and then thrive. And we'll talk more about that. But the challenges that the air traffic control business has are the same challenges that every industry has, albeit it moves a lot slower. So technology disruption, new entrants, and just the need to constantly reinvent themselves. So,
but it's not like there's competition as such, is there? I mean,
it's starting. So air traffic control, what is it? Basically, it's having aircraft come in and out of airspace over a country. Elements of that are now being done outside of a standard jurisdiction. So a couple of examples: the Brits are now providing services in Spain. The Germans are providing services in the UK, and so
so you can outsource.
Yeah, basically.
Oh,
so
really?
those sovereign lines are beginning to be blurred.
All right.
So New Zealand, I think for a while we've been pretty protected in terms of actual disruption, but it's as we've seen in banking and other industries, it's the nibbling around the edges is where disruption starts, and we're already starting to see that here in New Zealand.
Right. So what happens? So how did you move from obviously doing strategy for airways, is where you work, to now running what is effectively a startup? What does that journey look like? How did you make that move?
Yeah. So as I was saying earlier, kind of the way that businesses do strategy, I think it's changing quite a bit. So instead of doing your strategic plan, which is 5-10 years, and you lock that in, and the document goes up and collects dust in the shelf. I think now strategy, you have to set a long-term vision, a North Star for the business to go after, and then you're having shorter-term 2 or 3 year plans of execution. Yeah. What we found at Airways, we created a vision to create a digital business out of a traditional air traffic control company. Part of that was, we need to digitize the way we provide services. We need to digitize our operating models. But we also had to realize that drones are exponentially growing well, globally, but especially in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So there's 5,000 aircraft in New Zealand, and the CEA estimate there's about 280,000 drones in New Zealand. And so, again, as a business, we've set our strategy towards how do we address both of those, but how do we shift into providing more services for that type of a market.
It's a lot of aircraft.
It's heaps. And so, how did I move from strategy into this? So, once we had the strategy set and kind of that North Star set, there was a pretty big gap about, well, how do we start to manage that increased drone traffic across the country? And we had a few tools in place, but basically we didn't have the entity we needed to run it properly. And so we decided to set up a business that was very separate from Airways, because again, Airways, very successful organization, very well run, but risk adverse organization on purpose, because we don't want a lot of risk in a business that keeps air traffic separated. So let's create a separate entity, make it really entrepreneurial, staff it with a different mindset that can, fail fast, grow, be agile, nimble, all those terms. But also set it up in the space where our customers are living. So Central City, down near the viaduct. And so we've set up this entity 6 months ago, and we're basically moving very fast to get services to market.
This is a hard thing, right? For every strategist, is to actually say, you know what, I'm going to go and execute too, right? Some people would say, holy smokes, that's either really brave or really, really insane.
Yeah.
Which one do you reckon it is? And does it require the strategist to make that happen?
Well, I think, again, this is how strategy is evolving. If strategists are just developing plans, they're probably not going to be in a job very long. If you don't develop a plan that you can then implement and execute, or work with a team that can do that, and do that very rapidly, they just won't be relevant. Because all industries are seeing that if they're not in a constant state of change, in a constant state of reinvention, they're going to be falling behind. And that's where I think strategists have to really focus is, give me a great plan, but then execute quickly and prove that it works. And then you can always exit it to somebody else.
But it's not like you learn that in school, right? I mean, it's not like you go to school to learn how to actually see the plan through.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, are you, I would say making it up as you go along, but are you exploring terrain that is actually not explored by strategists in general?
Absolutely. And there was a great analogy that a colleague used this morning, which was, we're on the train, but we're laying the tracks at the same time. And so this is where I think if you can set a North Star where the business wants to go, that North Star is clear because it gets everybody emotionally engaged. But there's a whole lot of vagueness on how you get there. So set the North Star and then have short-term plans that can make course. It's this term pivoting that we keep hearing about, that you can pivot along the way. And that's exactly what we're doing here at Airshare. We don't know all the answers right now. We've got the basics in place, but we're trying a lot of things and we're learning as we go. And that's where I think strategy's really changed. It's gone from kind of detailed research, scenario planning, and building a big plan to, we got an idea where we want to go. Now let's just try a lot of things, build evidence, and then make decisions off the evidence.
So you've obviously got experience from 3 markets, essentially: the States, the UK, and New Zealand. What's the difference have you found? Obviously scale is one thing, but what else have you found in sort of the cultural to-do-ness, or like, let's get this done aspect in those 3, like if you had to compare the 3 of them?
Well, two perspectives on that. One in terms of operating with that entrepreneurial mindset.
Where do you find that more, like that innovative?
Spectrum? Well, the US for sure. Well, it depends on where you are in the US. If you're on the coasts, you'll have a lot more of that. In the interior, probably less so. The UK is still very much more of a legacy way of thinking in terms of business execution. Kiwis are more in that entrepreneurial mindset, but what's interesting about Kiwis I've noticed is very entrepreneurial at a local level, but when you think about scaling and growing offshore, that's where there's a confidence thing that comes in.
Is it because of practice? Is this because we've just not had that much practice? I mean, if you look at our food market, there's a lot of practice of exporting everything. But we haven't had that in the tech industry as much. I mean,
there's probably some truth to that. Experience but I think it's mainly confidence. And that's a real.
But is that just an American thing to say? Because you guys ooze confidence, from day one you just asked to present everything.
No, I don't. I think we're now in our competitors are now global.
Right.
And if we think they're, in every industry, I mean, banking is a great example. When I was at Kiwi Bank, we were looking at the new entrants that were not only in New Zealand but also in Australia and overseas that wanted to come into the market.
Right.
And so we're no longer competing at a local level. And so if Kiwi business owners don't have that perspective that I'm growing and scaling a business that could be global, then I think they're missing a trick.
So what do you reckon is some of the, especially in this field that you're in, right, which is regulated, you're obviously looking at things, you can't just autonomously fly something in the sky.
Yeah.
What is the biggest challenge right now? Is it, I mean, you talk about culture, you talk about technology, you're talking about infrastructure. What is one of the biggest challenges for you right now, today, to make Airshare ubiquitous?
I think there's two challenges. In terms of the technology, the systems, and the processes to support it, we've got a pretty good handle on that, and there's some good examples overseas of people that are in this space where we need to be. The two areas that I think we're going to struggle with is social acceptance and the regulatory machine.
And is that a global concern, or is it very local to New Zealand?
No, it's global. So at one side it's privacy considerations. The other side it's just the annoyance of having drones flying around. And so, but all of that's solvable through the way that drones are flown, and also demonstrating the value from drones. And so, you see a lot in the press about we want to do pizza deliveries or coffee deliveries.
Yeah, what do you think about that? When you hear Amazon's doing delivery, I mean, we heard that 5 years ago, right? The promise of Amazon doing drone delivery.
Yeah.
And they had predicted that in 5 years, and it was like 5 years ago, like few Tuesdays ago.
Yeah.
So what do you see? Because you're close to this. So what do you see as what is reality versus this is just innovation theater?
Well, the ability to actually do these kind of deliveries is very close. I'd say within 12 months we should be able to do this. I think there's a better social acceptance if we can prove that drones can be used for social good. And so things like, surf lifesaving, delivering first responders to an accident, for say a defibrillator to someone that's in a car crash, using drones for social good first, I think we get a lot stronger social acceptance, and then you bring on things like drone deliveries for consumer products.
And wouldn't that be harder though, like for social good causes? Like, is it harder for you to sell delivering a pizza than it is to sell, or let's save a life with a drone?
No, I think it's a lot easier to sell. We're going to save a life with a drone. Absolutely.
Right, that's interesting.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
And so that's kind of how we our priorities are, number one, we want to keep the skies safe.
Right.
And so let's get a handle around where are the drones? Can we track them? Can we monitor them?
So, and that's is that the core offering for Airshare?
So we have two customers.
Right.
Our main customer is the airlines and the airports, and our responsibility is to ensure that drones are not interfering with the existing aviation system, or they're integrating safely. So that's our number one priority. The second priority is let's engage with the drone community and see if we can offer value-added services that make their life easier when they're flying the drones. Because I think if you have the stick of regulation saying you must use these things, people won't use them, and they've already proven that they won't use them. So we want to take a much more of a customer experience driven design thinking kind of approach to these guys, saying here's some great services. In fact, they're so valuable to your operation or your business that you'd be willing to pay for them. And so that's really our two drivers.
You're creating a bridge between two problems, essentially.
Well, I think drone growth generally creates there's opportunities and threats with it.
That's right.
The threat is, are these things going to smash into each other, or aircraft, or individuals? And again, that's our number one priority. The second is, how can you use drones for good or for economic growth?
Right.
And if there's a third one, which is one that we're also starting to explore, it's how do you attract overseas drone R&D into New Zealand? Because New Zealand's got a very progressive regulatory environment, and it's probably one of the only countries where you can get the right government agencies in a room within a week's phone call to make decisions. And so we can move a lot faster and more nimbler than most countries. And as a result, well, there's Zephyr Cora, they've come to trial here, and we've got 2 or 3 other companies, really interesting technology that want to trial here as well for that reason.
So tell me about CEO leading the charge for innovation, right?
Yeah.
And you always, there's layers of bureaucracy that every CEO has to go through. So what's your advice to other CEOs out there to foster innovation like this? Because you're clearly leading the charge.
Yeah.
In not just the conversation, but also in on the world stage, you're sort of leading the charge. What is your gotcha? Don't go there, or go there because it's going to prove fruitful.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, about how strategy's changed, and I think companies and individuals need to recognize that change is the new normal, uncertainty is the new normal, and standing still is actually going behind. And so at an individual level, if you're not reinventing yourself every year and learning brand new skills and applying those skills and executing, you're actually going to be irrelevant in a period of time. And it's the same with businesses. So I think if you can create an organization and employees that are learning and curious about the world, I think that's critical, because when you're curious, you learn new things, you innovate by default. If you're forcing innovation, I think you're going to have people that would warm to that or people that won't warm to that. But if you encourage curiosity, that's quite critical. So that's a key one, and just recognizing that you have to continue to reinvent yourself.
So what do you, like, I'm very optimistic about your company, so I'm pretty excited. What are you optimistic for? Like, what is your optimistic 2-year prediction about this space?
Yeah. So, in fact, we've got a big here audacious goal. By the America's Cup, we'd love to see an autonomous passenger aircraft flying from Auckland Airport down to the viaduct.
That's pretty ambitious.
It's pretty ambitious, and we're talking to a lot of the parties that would be involved in that process to see if we can make that happen. In and of itself, that's interesting, but what our goal is to have the system in place to support it. So the right regulation, the right policy, the right drone traffic management system, the right ability to be able to track and identify where drones are, the right procedures in the air, the right authorities, approvals. And so getting all of those pieces in place to enable that kind of flight is really what our goal is. So our focus is, let's get that infrastructure in place to enable all of these exciting things that you can do with drones, and then make sure that they're safely integrating with the existing aviation system.
So right now, drone operators out there, what do they get by using Airshare?
So they get certainty on where they can and can't fly.
And that's a big one, right? Because there's always this insecurity. It's like, can I fly it here?
It's massive, because the way it's structured in New Zealand, it's not always clear, and there's different landowner approvals. So if you fly A to B, you may have to get Department of Conservation approval, council, airways, et cetera, and that could take several weeks to get that approval.
Interesting. Right.
So Airshare will.
And do they have an approval process?
They all have approval processes, but they're all different.
Right.
Some are paper-based, some are online, et cetera.
Right.
So Airshare will basically automate that approval process. So it'll tell you, where can I fly? And then when you file a flight plan, you can get the approvals automated so that you've got a pretty instant.
So what's the lead time? Like, I want to fly from this point to this point. I just go on your website and it all gets sorted. You guys handle everything.
Yeah, it obviously depends on where you want to fly. But if you're flying in an area that doesn't require a lot of approvals, you can get approval on the spot.
Yeah, like I'm not going to let's fly across the runway on Auckland Airport.
Yeah, that's a bit harder. But yeah, what we want to do is we want to remove friction out of the process. And when we surveyed our community, that was the biggest thing. They said, hey, we understand the rules, but it's actually really hard to abide by them because there's so much friction in the process. And so we see a lot of people just coming online, looking at our maps, and then going and flying without filing the flight plan.
Oh, is it?
And so we want to make it really easy to know where you can fly, file your flight plan, and then when you're flying, provide you information to support your flight so it's done safely. So are there other aircraft in the area? Are there other drones in the area? And are there other obstacles like cranes or other things that you might need to avoid?
Oh, so you're tracking all of it?
It's all real time. And so it's pre-flight, it's during flight, and then post-flight. And that's for the drone community today. In the future, when, say, Amazon drone delivery comes to town, their system will be able to plug into ours, and we'll be able to share the data and allow them to fly safely and integrate.
Right, and you're already obviously having those conversations or planning on having those conversations with these big suppliers in the world?
Oh, I can tell you, there's not a week that goes by where we're not getting a phone call from someone from Silicon Valley or somewhere in Europe that wants to trial technology here because we've got such a progressive environment.
Cool. So
That's
how do
pretty
we
cool
find you? Like, how do we find you, and what's the way that we can engage with Airshare?
Yeah, well, the easy thing is to go to airshare.co.nz.
Right.
And over the next few months, we're going to start engaging a lot more with the community. So not only the drone community, but also agencies that are involved. So we'll be doing a lot more in the press and a lot more events to talk about what we're doing. So it's an exciting time.
Exciting. I can't wait to buy some drones. Thank you, Trent.
Thanks, Clint, for your time.
Cheers, mate.